Welcome to NewsNation's Backscroll, where we look back at our major news coverage on the most important topics and personalities of our time.
Why do you believe it's the vaccine, and what has happened when you've tried to get clinical analysis of it or answers?
So let me first thank you for having the courage to bring this topic out. I've waited 3 years for this moment. So this is really important to me and thousands of other people just like me. Why do I believe this? It's not a belief, it's a fact. And as soon as I was injured within 15, 20 minutes of my first dose, I had paresthesias, numbness tingling up and down my injected arm that over days spread to my face and my eyes. I went to see a neurologist. He ran some tests. He's like, well, this is all new. We don't know much about it, but the hospital is going to mandate it. You should get a second dose. And everything in my medical mind and in my bones was telling me, no, if you have a reaction after something, don't do it again. But the pressure was immense, and then 3 weeks rolled around, I got a second dose, and after that, everything blew up. I went from being a healthy, 100% healthy, fully functioning nurse to in a complete downward spiral of health. I had a myriad of symptoms.
And in the succeeding years, have you gotten any clarity from doctors that, yeah, we are seeing this, or from the drug manufacturer putting out any information about what could happen as a side effect?
No, as a research nurse practitioner and somebody who worked on vaccine research, I thought after I was injured, there would be people to help me. I'm like, I'm in New York City. I will have there will be medical people ready to help me. There must be interest to find out what happened or what went wrong with me. I reached out to my political representatives. I reached out to the NIH, the CDC, the FDA. I got no answers. No one wanted to touch it. I got token responses back or no response. And so I went on a mission to research myself and help others.
What have you found out? And what do you see in your blood work?
So I sent, in the early days when I couldn't get answers here at home in America, I sent my blood over to Germany. And I had help with connecting with German scientists. They were more interested to help me than people here in my own country.
It's less political there.
That testing showed I developed several autoantibodies, many of them that some theorists or some scientists believe are attributed to this POTS, or positional tachycardia that you mentioned, where every time I stand, my heart zooms. So some of my autoantibodies look similar to people with long COVID, and I never had COVID. And that was proven through immunological studies of my blood. They could not find any viral antibodies.
We don't even really have an official finding on long COVID. And I know that's weird because I say that I have long COVID, but I only say that I have long COVID because the doctors who are treating me are calling it long COVID, and they say that they're not getting a whole lot of support from the government, because even though we are spending a lot of money in the U.S. On a specific effort to research long COVID, they take a long time. And I think there's really no incentive to get out in front of this because it's just bad PR. Right? I mean, nobody's going to get patted on the back for saying, yeah, Sean's right. There's side effects on some of the vaccines or all of the vaccines that we should be talking about and figuring out how to treat. And there is long COVID and there's lots. Nobody wants to say that because it's all political now.
Right. And we're caught in the crosshairs of the politics. I thought all my pro-vaccine colleagues that championed me on would be there to lift me up and help me. And in fact, they're the ones who turned around, dismissed, denied, and tried to censor and bury me.
What do they think? You're chasing money?
What's that?
What do they think? You're chasing money?
I think that it's just the taboo around, like you said, about vaccines. They're afraid that by showing my face, I'll drive vaccine hesitancy. But what they don't realize, and what I have come to realize, is that the censorship and the hiding of it is actually fueling vaccine hesitancy. If the government had just said, hey, these are novel vaccines. We don't, there will be reactions. Let's just have a program in place to deal with them.
Right.
Set up a fund to obligate the manufacturers to provide help or research. I think the citizens would have appreciated that.
Joining us now, Dr. Drew Pinsky, Chief Medical Board Member of the wellness company, TWC Health. Also interviewed Kennedy several times, done a lot of work with him. It's glad to have you here, sir. Thank you. So much to get to. But this concept that we have a health crisis in America and more medication from big pharma may not be the answer doesn't seem that outrageous to me.
No, it isn't. And what is outrageous is that before this week, you were unable to ask the question, why are these things happening? And still, you will get terrific derision if you ask, why did autism go from 1 in 5,000 to 30 in 100? Well, I mean, we have to ask these questions. Why did obesity go up? Why is diabetes going up? When I was in training, it was always being dismissed as, well, we're just living so long that people are ending up with chronic disease towards the end of life. That is no longer the case. And it's increasingly clear that at least part of the problem is the way we eat and the food we get, which, if you've heard, the very same lobbyists, scientists, and marketing professionals moved over from tobacco to food. So no surprise, yummy, addictive food, heavy lobbying, and we have unhealthy populations.
Yeah, I have to confess that I wrote this segment and researched it while eating a combination of Swedish Fish and Sour Patch Kids. So there is that. But there is a couple of things here. One, Republicans saying, you think Robert F. Kennedy's weird, just look at Rachel Levine, Assistant Secretary of Health right now. We'll put the picture up. People can decide for themselves. It was a he before she became a she. We'll get the picture there in a second. But there's this orthodoxy, right? You can't question why girls are having their periods younger and younger, going through puberty younger and younger, why young men, as they grow up into their teenage years, no longer look like the young men of the 1960s and 70s, just looking like the composite pictures in high schools. You can't ask why everybody in Italy is so much healthier, even though they eat pasta and drink wine.
Exactly.
You see Robert Kennedy actually asking those questions and getting answers?
Oh, I do. This is his thing. When I first interviewed him, he goes, "Look, I know how to dig into corrupt organizations. I've done it my whole career." And he said, first thing I'm going to do, and I don't know if you saw the announcement, it's all over X right now, but he said to me, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in the major journal editors and publishers, and I'm going to threaten them with a RICO action if they don't disclose everything about their relationship with Big Pharma and straighten that out. He just announced that not only is he already doing that, there's going to be a RICO action, he's including the medical societies in that action. So he will find out what influence there has been, how it has adulterated the publishing process, how it adulterates science itself. And there's just no doubt that that's happening. And we saw one of the great favors that COVID did to us, it had peeled that back where you could see it. Certain things weren't being published and only other things were being published. That is anathema to science.
So much here. We're learning now in the data that it was suburban moms who actually found what Robert F. Kennedy was saying so interesting. We said at the beginning of the program that, look, you can see a guy who is a vaccine conspiracy theorist, vaccine questioner, whatever you want to say, who kills bears, or you can see a guy who's a champion for health. I see you putting your hands up. I'm going to let you answer. How and what is incumbent upon Robert F. Kennedy to not allow that narrative to take hold?
Well, it is incumbent upon everybody to continue to pressure the press. I wonder if he doesn't sue the press for slander, because he's fully vaxxed, his family's fully vaxxed. He has no vaccine denialism. He wants vaccines subjected to the same scientific rigor as all the other medication that people like me are allowed by the FDA to bring to market. So we could use these things. As it is an entirely different operation with no liability to speak of. And there may be really significant problems with these these vaccines, at least we should be able to ask the questions. I'm not a vax denier. Everybody's fully vaxxed in my practice. But when I give my patients informed consent, I have to include in that these things have not been tested the way I would be satisfied to really give them a clear understanding.
But critically, really critically, at the end of the day, the claim that the New York Times is making to the country, that everybody in the country believed that somehow this petition by ICANN, not Mr. Kennedy, had nothing to do with him, never discussed it with him, this petition would have left Americans without a polio vaccine. That claim is categorically false. They knew it was false when they published it. They intended the country to be misled, and that's what they accomplished. All of this is intended for one purpose. They're desperately trying to derail Mr. Kennedy's potential confirmation. And I'll tell you, if this is the best they could come up with, if the best they can come up with is a petition that was filed on behalf of somebody else, not Mr. Kennedy, that he didn't even know about, and then misrepresent what it was actually trying to accomplish, I mean, I'd say Mr. Kennedy's in a pretty good position, and they're doing a pretty bad job. But, you know, let me tell you, if I may, I can tell you why I do think it's important to what this petition was asking for, okay? It's important for the following reason. The outrage here should not be about what the New York Times is saying. The outrage here should be that the FDA licensed a product for injection into children based on a clinical trial that only reviewed safety for 3 days after injection. That's where the outrage should be. That should have been the New York Times headline, not the headline that they had. Most drugs are licensed based on multi-year placebo-controlled trials. Don't take my word for it. Go to the FDA website. Take a look yourself. You know,
But
in
aren't they not
1986,
allowed to
pharmaceutical
do?
companies.
Aren't they not allowed to do the placebo type trials on the kids? Isn't it found to be unethical because of their age and stage?
Only if placebo-controlled trials are conducted with children all the time. It's only considered unethical
For
if there's
polio.
an existing product that already treats that condition. Okay, for polio, in this instance, if they wanted to have done a placebo-controlled trial, they could have potentially done it because it was a brand new technology, but they could have at least used an existing polio vaccine as the control. In this clinical trial, there was no control, meaning if they had an existing polio vaccine that they thought that they had determined was safe, yes, they could have used that as a control. But even if they used another polio vaccine as a control, Chris, even if they would have done that, you only have 3 days of safety data after injection. That's useless to determine safety. You can't do that.
Are you going to keep the petition or are you going to withdraw it, Aaron?
It's not my petition, sir. I have a client, ICANN, and if they, you know, it'll be their choice whether they want to leave the petition in place. But look, I will tell you this. I could tell you this. ICANN did not file that petition in order to get the FDA to actually withdraw the vaccine. When it was filed in 2022, they never thought for a moment the FDA would require that. It's just a legal tool. It's the legal mechanism by which to get the FDA to review the clinical trial. That's all they really want. They just want the FDA to require proper data. ICANN does not really want, and nor do they ever expect, the vaccine to be withdrawn. This is about choice. It's about informed consent. That's the point. That's the focus.
Understood.
Right? And the problem here is that, just super quick. The problem here is that in 1986, if I may, in 1986, the National Childhood Vaccine Act was passed by Congress to give immunity to vaccine makers for any injuries caused by their vaccines. At that time, there were only 3 injections in the first year of life. That's it, according to CDC schedule. We're now up to 29 injections in the first year of life.
And they have the same protection.
So all of those vaccines that came on, and they have the same protection. Yeah. All those vaccines that came on during the last, since 1986, including IPOL, this is why the clinical trials and doing proper controls are so critical. We've gone from under 13% chronic health disease in America among children to over 50%. I'm not saying vaccines cause all those, but we gotta rule that out, and that's why clinical trials are so critical.
December 2021, more than 800,000 people had died as a result of COVID-19. That's just here in the United States. Joining us now, Dr. Umesh Adalja, an infectious disease specialist and senior scholar at Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. Doctor, long time no see. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Of course, anytime. So while many Americans believe the COVID vaccine helped us get back to normal, there's no denying the rapid development of the vaccines, the subsequent rollout fed into vaccine hesitancy. How could vaccine education been handled better here?
Well, I think the first thing is the fact that the vaccine was something of, one of the greatest scientific achievements in modern history. To have a vaccine for a virus that wasn't even known to humans before December 2019, in less than a year, that's really, I think, a tremendous acclamation of how really science and medicine have advanced. However, that's a feature. The speed of the mRNA vaccines is a feature, but it got seen as a bug by many people, that this was something that made them vaccine hesitant. And I think it would have been important, and it is important, to really recognize the fact that even though this was the fastest vaccination on record, the lead up to it, the decades of work on mRNA vaccine technology had really proved that this was a safe and effective technology. And I think many people didn't understand the fact that there had been a quest to develop mRNA vaccines reaching back at least until the 1990s or even further. And that wasn't part of the discussion. I think not because it was deliberately left out. I think just people weren't really giving the scientific context for what these vaccines really represented. And remember, the anti-vaccine movement was poised to jump. Even if this would have taken 2 years, they would have attacked it. And they've attacked every vaccine that we've developed, even if it's been something that's taken years to develop, like, for example, the HPV vaccines, like Gardasil. They've attacked those, even though they don't have that same timeline as the COVID-19 vaccines.
We know of instances of long COVID in many vaccine recipients. I want to talk about a recent study. It details what's being referred to as post-vaccination syndrome. There were serious side effects, including biological changes that are now being linked to the COVID-19 vaccine. You and I spoke almost weekly during COVID. In hindsight, some are very frustrated that more wasn't done to fully test these vaccines before they were made widely available, or the risk wasn't communicated better. What are your thoughts on that, especially now knowing a lot of these mRNA vaccines were being worked on since the 1990s, to your point?
Well, I don't think that this study that you're referencing is something that really changes the equation. Remember, this is a study it's a preprint. It hasn't gone through peer review, and I think there's been a lot of questions regarding the methodology to make sure that they're actually seeing a real signal here. But this is something that doesn't make complete biological sense. So I think it's really important to drill into this. But the side effects, as side effects were announced or were discovered, for example, myocarditis in adolescent males, that was something that became very well known, as well as the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and the clotting issues that happened there. That became very well known, and they actually paused that. So I don't necessarily think that there's been some kind of cover up of vaccine side effects. I think if you look at, on balance, what this vaccine has done, it's saved millions and millions of lives, and the side effects are very minimal in that sense. But every vaccine has side effects. Every vaccine has a risk benefit analysis you have to go through, and on balance, especially for high risk people, these vaccines are life saving.
Doctor, you are well respected in your field. We are now seeing a massive measles outbreak, nearly 230 cases in West Texas, New Mexico this year. 2 people have already died. What should health experts and the general public be doing right now to get in front of this?
The thing is, the solution to the measles outbreaks that we're seeing now and the ones that we've seen in years past has been the same solution since the 1960s. It is to have a very high vaccination rate. And when you look at where this is occurring, in counties like Gaines County in Texas, the vaccination rates are extremely low. And this is the most contagious infectious disease known to humans. So if that vaccination rate is below 95%, outbreaks are going to occur. So the best thing that can happen is individuals who are not vaccinated need to get vaccinated. That's what's going to put an end to this outbreak. And I think this is kind of exactly what you would expect when vaccination rates fall. And measles is kind of the canary in the coal mine. It is the first infectious disease that kind of roars back when vaccination rates fall because it's so contagious. So it is the vaccine that is the solution to what's going on in Texas and in New Mexico.
I want to ask you about some news that came out late last night. The CDC is now planning to investigate links between vaccines and autism. You and I know there have been dozens of studies. It's never found a link. Are you concerned this will create more vaccine skepticism?
Yes, this is something that has been disproven. It was a false, fabricated study that has been living on now for decades, even though it's completely false. And trying to keep disproving this wastes a lot of resources. This is going to cost millions and millions of dollars, and it also puts doubt in people's minds that this link has not been completely disputed. So no, I think this is a horrible decision. I think it's going to add to more vaccine hesitancy, and it's going to divert resources away from important studies that would actually help elucidate what actually is behind autism. And we know it's not vaccines, but they keep looking there. And it's like I've heard before, it's like trying to prove that the world is round multiple times. This has already been done.
Nothing is off limits as the Make America Healthy Again Commission works to shake up the health industry. The HHS taking a close look at certain vaccines and any possible link to chronic illness. NewsNation weekend anchor Anna Koyman joins us now. Anna, good morning. So I'm curious, you know, as this new presidential commission goes through these vaccines, do you think it will prompt any bans?
Now, here's what I can tell you, Kelly. Good morning to you. Good morning to everybody at home. As Robert F. Kennedy Jr. begins his Make America Healthy Again mission, he's setting his sights on vaccines, namely mRNA vaccines. The fairly new medical technology got its first major rollout during the COVID-19 pandemic. mRNA vaccines have faced widespread criticism, even though they've been in development since the 1970s. And now RFK Jr., who's been called a vaccine skeptic and the nation's new top public health expert, is promising to re-examine their effectiveness and potential drawbacks. That's despite studies showing they are safe. At least 3 states have already taken steps to limit their use on their own. Florida was first, but now Idaho and Montana have introduced legislation to limit or ban mRNA vaccines in their states. Those have largely failed or are waiting on a vote. Now, NewsNation also spoke with an infectious diseases expert. He says some of the mRNA skepticism stems from how fast they can be developed, how quickly they were introduced during COVID, and third, they've also developed a political stigma.
Banning mRNA is a little like banning artificial intelligence. The radio was fine, the telephone was good, the computer is better, but we're not going to do AI. We're going to ban it. And so you can't hold back science. Science is constantly advancing and creating newer and better and more effective vaccines. mRNA vaccines are an example of that.
Now, there are other mRNA vaccines in development, including several for different types of cancers, and even one for the bird flu in humans. But the big goal for the president's new MAHA Commission, Kelly, is to come up with a strategy around children's health and childhood vaccines. Those, I'm told, not mRNA-based, to be clear, but they have given themselves 6 months to review all of this. Back to you.
Perspective now from physician and public health specialist and Dr. Yalda Safai. All right, doctor, good to see you. What is your perspective on all of this? We'll start with how Kennedy is kind of now handling it and what we should be talking about.
Well, it's promising that he's backed away from some of the misinformation he was spreading about vaccines. But I think the reason he is now, backing away from those claims is that this public health crisis is now his problem. Before it wasn't. And the outbreak we're seeing right now is a direct result of what vaccine hesitancy could cause. Measles is a preventable disease. That death could have been completely preventable. So I think now what you're seeing, the change in tone, is because now this is his problem and before it wasn't.
These numbers, I was looking, we could put them up on the screen about exemptions to the vaccine in Texas. So, it's interesting what's happened over, I guess it's the last decade or so, right? Because if you look at 2014, MMR vaccine exemptions were at 0.76% of the state. But now you fast forward to 2024, the number's up to 2.3%. So what, is it just Texas? Probably not, right? What's going on here in the last decade or so?
Oh, it's not Texas at all. This outbreak happens to be in Texas, but there have been outbreaks here and there over the past decade or so. But this is a direct result of the vaccine hesitancy movement we've been seeing for the past decade or so. This was supposed to be an eradicated illness, but now we're seeing a resurgence of it. The problem with measles is it's extremely contagious. One person can impact 8 to 10 people. So if one person comes to kindergarten with measles, they're endangering 8 to 10 people. And sometimes there's kids in kindergarten or preschool that are too young to get vaccinated or have an underlying health condition that prevents them from getting vaccinated. So Kennedy keeps preaching this is a personal choice, but when you're affecting other people's health, it's no longer a personal choice, unfortunately. So to answer your question.
From some parents who have young children, I think, and maybe they conflate a lot of different things at once. They say now, especially, and I don't remember this when my kids were young, it wasn't as prevalent, I don't think, about how many vaccines, especially young babies, are getting in one doctor's visit, at each time. So they say to themselves, well, do I want to wait a little bit? But with measles, measles has been around forever. This is one of the main ones that you should be getting, right, at a certain time. I mean, what type of advice do you give to parents? Because I know that is an issue that I've heard about where people come in and say, why am I getting, all these shots at once?
Sure, I'm glad you mentioned this. Well, the measles vaccine has been around since the 60s, so
Right.
it's not a new vaccine. We know it's safe, we know it's effective, we know it's necessary. If I understand how people have hesitancy about getting too many vaccines at once, so I think it's really up to the pediatrician to be able to come up with a schedule to make the parents more comfortable if that is an issue. But this schedule is given for a reason. There's certain ages that you are now eligible and your body can tolerate the vaccines. It's not, the pediatricians have come up with this vaccine schedule based on years of research. But I think if you are faced as a physician with a parent that's hesitant, it's really up to you to make them as comfortable as possible, but try to encourage them to get it as soon as possible. Because if you send a young folk who's not vaccinated to kindergarten, to preschool with other people who, are not vaccinated, might have measles, you're putting them in danger. So it's the best idea to get them those vaccines as soon as possible.
All right, Dr. Yalda-Safai, thank you.
Joining us now, Dr. Dana Hawkinson, Medical Director of Infection Prevention and Control at the University of Kansas Health System. Good morning to you and welcome. How important is it that everyone get on the same page when it comes to fighting this measles outbreak?
Oh, I think it's very important. In the medical and public health community, we know that there is the overwhelming consensus about what it takes to stop this or decrease this outbreak. And it is simple. It is that very safe, very effective vaccine.
How much protection does the vaccine offer?
Oh, certainly. The vaccine offers an immense amount of protection, 93% after that first dose, so protection against disease and the complications. After the second dose, up to 97% or more protection against the disease and complications. Again, a decades-long track record of safety and efficacy about protecting against the complications of this disease.
As I mentioned, most of the cases now spreading are within the unvaccinated community, but there are some vaccinated cases. How likely are you to get it? And do the symptoms and the treatment, are they different if you're vaccinated?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. So we certainly know there can be some breakthrough, and in this case, breakthrough after vaccine. There can be cases of people who've been vaccinated and do have some symptoms of the disease, but those symptoms are immensely less than if you are unvaccinated, and the chance of complications are extremely less, and then also your ability to spread it is less as well. So we know that the vaccine will help with that overall, but I think we need to understand that, just as you said, it continues to be a disease of the unvaccinated, and with that, we understand the vaccine rates in the United States, which are significantly lower than they were 5 or 10 years ago. So all of those people who are unvaccinated, who are unprotected, are going to be at risk of getting the disease.
Dr. Hawkinson, how does the measles spread?
So measles is the airborne spreader. It is unfortunate, but when somebody has this disease and they are spreading the disease, you can spread it from 4 days before the rash occurs until 4 days afterward. If they walk through someplace like a clinic or a store or a church or an airport, that virus can linger in the air for up to 2 hours. People then can inhale it even an hour later and become infected with it. So it is one of the most infectious viruses that we have encountered as humans.
So what is happening in communities, big and small, across the country to combat this, to educate the public, and what should folks watching do to best protect themselves?
Yeah, it's hard to know exactly what every community is doing. Certainly, we know in Kansas here and in southwest Kansas, where we have had cases, there is a public health effort to get out the accurate information, to get vaccinated, understand your vaccine status. Certainly, even us here at the University of Kansas Health System and in our community, we are continuing to endorse understanding your vaccine status and getting vaccinated. And I think even in Texas, there are vaccine clinic or campaigns going on as well. So I think it's important for every community, because we know that overall in the United States, vaccine rates are lower, to understand community vaccination rates, really get out, endorse, as we had talked about. The consensus is to understand and know and endorse the vaccine, because the vaccine will offer protection against the disease and, most importantly, against those complications and especially death. We know we've had 3 deaths so far. It is tragic. It is not just a number. Even 1 death is too many for this disease because we know we have a very safe, very effective vaccine to stop those types of things.
So this will all be part of the discussion today as the CDC meets. How do you view the CDC's role in this conversation and the weight that any decisions made today or in the days and weeks to come will play in this conversation?
Yeah, I think the role of the CDC, these people who are very educated, very experienced, is to look at all the information, look at the data, draw their conclusions and recommendations from that, and put out the safest recommendations. Again, it is a recommendation body. It is not to mandate or do anything like that. It is to recommend the safest practices for individuals, for communities, for health systems. Put out those recommendations so that we can keep our communities safe. We can keep our families safe, our loved ones, and I think that's what will go on today.
Joining us now, Dr. Amish Adalja, Senior Scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. Welcome to you, Doctor. I appreciate your time on this. More research is what he would like to see, and it's hard to dispute, you know, the more we know, the better off we are. But he says some vaccines may be good, some are bad. Where do you even begin?
When someone's like RFK Jr., you can't really take what he's saying at face value because he's never named a vaccine that he thinks is good. And even vaccines that are tried and true, that have really demonstrated their efficacy over decades and decades, like the measles vaccine, he's been opposed to. He wrote to the Prime Minister of Samoa during an outbreak that was going on there with measles to tell people that the vaccine was actually causing the measles. So I don't believe it for a second. I don't think that he has any actual real research agenda that he wants to pursue. Basically, he has a fixed idea that's anti-vaccine, that's anti-medical technology, and he will kind of say anything. And I think you just have to kind of almost discard what he says because it's not really going to lead to safer or more effective vaccines. I think we're already doing what leads to safer and effective more vaccine. What are
your greatest concerns as more research is conducted and there's the potential that some of the mandates are relaxed with diseases like measles, whooping cough, polio?
There's nothing that more research is going to show that's going to dissuade the value of vaccines. The science, facts, reality, they're on the side of vaccines. They're not on RFK Jr.'s side. What I do worry about, though, is if he continues with this rhetoric at the state level, at school district level, you're going to start to see relaxation of vaccine requirements for school entries. People use the word mandates, but they're not mandates. They're requirements to enter into a school, for example. And then you're going to see more slippage and more outbreaks in certain states where they're already below the critical threshold, like in Oregon, for example, or Idaho. And that's going to make these diseases disruptive again and cause stress on the healthcare sector, stress on the public health agencies that are already overstressed. So I think what this does is it really elevates one of the anti-vaccine movement's biggest stars to a position where he can wield a lot more influence and even government power. And I think that's something that the anti-vaccine movement has hoped for a long time. And now they unfortunately will have it, and we will all pay the consequences for this.
So you're going to have some tough discussions, I would imagine, with a lot of patients who are curious and confused. How do you advise them to do their own research so that they feel assured in the vaccines that they're giving of the schedule?
Well, the whole phrase "do your own research" can sometimes be very nebulous because if you start looking on the internet, you might end up on one of RFK Jr.'s sites or one of his colleagues' sites and then get completely inundated with misinformation. But what I tell people is, first of all, to use their eyes. Think about what their grandparents' experience was with certain diseases like measles and whooping cough and chicken pox and influenza and all that. And just remember what happened with COVID. All of us lived through that. And we saw how things dramatically changed for the better once vaccines were available. So there's this evidence that's available to everybody. Then it's looking for trusted experts, looking for good sources of information that are coming from scientists that have an established track record of being objective about the facts, that don't have a political agenda. And that's very hard to do in this environment if you're not already exposed to it, because there is so much misinformation that lots of people can get duped. And there's even people in my field that are physicians that are purveyors of misinformation as well. So it's very challenging for the average person to navigate all of this. And I think it's only going to get worse with someone like RFK Jr. in a position of power.
How do you ease people's concerns who are worried about side effects from vaccines, which are always a possibility?
Well, side effects happen with anything you do, any drug you take, from aspirin to ibuprofen to any vaccine. And you have to weigh the risk and the benefit. So it's not as if we're asking everybody to go out and get a yellow fever vaccine, which has a lot of side effects. We're asking people to weigh the risk of getting the infection, whatever it might be, influenza, measles, COVID, against the side effects, and thinking about how that's manageable. There are ways to manage the side effects and ways to minimize them by using preventive drugs beforehand, like ibuprofen or Tylenol, talking to your doctor ahead of time. So what it is getting them prepared to know that there's going to be some side effects, and then giving them some solutions and saying that those side effects are being kind of outweighed by the benefit that you're getting from a shingles vaccine or whatever vaccine it might be. And that's kind of how you do it with any kind of medication that you give a patient. You tell them what the side effects are, and you say, I'm still going to recommend this because the benefits outweigh those side effects. And if there are serious side effects, you talk about those things. And there are multiple systems in place to pick up serious side effects from any medication, any vaccine, and that's always going on.
Yeah, do your research, but talk to a trusted provider like yourself and whoever is in your community that you've spoken with on this issue before. It can be very daunting to look at the idea of it, but certainly there's a lot of research out there. Dr. Amish Adalja, thank you so much for stopping by as always.
So I'd like to welcome in now from Shaker Medical Group, Dr. David Shaker. Dr. David, thank you so much for your time. What are your thoughts on this reports of this large study, considering there is this extensive scientific research that up until now certainly seems to have disproven evidence of a link between vaccines and autism? But do you think it is worth another look?
So I think it's important to start with the proof that you said, that thus far there's been no proof to show that there's any correlation or connection between the vaccine and any autism. That being said, generally in medicine, what we do is we design studies to be repeatable. We include methods, we include the samples, we include all the results in there, so that if another scientist wants to go forward and retest the same concepts, they can do them in a similar, repeatable way, or in a particularly different way to show similar outcomes or similar results with different samples. So in medicine, we commonly go back to the sources and say, let's review the same data. That's one thought. The other consideration is that there's always going to be new information, new data, new ways to test things. So there's no issue with us going back and reviewing something. I think the issue becomes the headline of, if we are reviewing it, that has to mean that there's something wrong. That's not entirely true, but unfortunately, it does churn in the news cycle and in the headlines.
Yeah, and we know medicine certainly is a practice, and and as you said, there's always new data, there's new information coming in. I'd like to listen to a bit of what the health secretary, of course, RFK Jr., said while he was being questioned during his confirmation hearings, and this is when it pertains to vaccinations.
If you are approved to this decision, to this position, will you say unequivocally, will you reassure mothers unequivocally and without qualification that the measles and hepatitis B vaccines do not cause autism?
Senator, I am not going into the agency with any.
Well, that's kind of a yes or no question, because because the data is there, and that's kind of a yes or no. And I don't mean to cut you off, but that really is a yes or no.
If the data is there, I will absolutely do that. I will never stick on a point if somebody shows me data that says I'm wrong.
All right, Dr. Shaker. So we're now seeing this current measles outbreak, but the health secretary has recently promoted the role of vaccination, but he's also saying to parents that vaccination is a personal choice, urging them to consult with their physician, which obviously that, seems like that's good advice. In your opinion, though, overall, is this good advice?
It's good advice to be vaccinated. I think that's the simplest way to put it. Us reviewing the information, us reviewing the details. I think people go into these Senate hearings wanting to be as neutral as possible, allowing themselves to be able to not fill anyone's particular shoes, but to be able to go in and test. That's one part. The other consideration is that there seems to be a group that doesn't want to get vaccinated for whatever purpose. Sometimes when you redo the testing and your own party comes and tells you that the studies show that vaccination is a positive, it may end up in the long run to be an overall net positive. Thus far, we have 222 cases. We have 2 deaths, but only 2% of those cases have been in the vaccinated population. So if you're vaccinated, you actually have nothing to worry about here. It's the unvaccinated population that needs to worry about. There is a 90% secondary infection rate with measles, which means that if you're around someone who has the infection, you have a 90% chance of catching it yourself. Vaccinations are simple to prove. The test will be of value. And then coming from that administration, it may also actually end up increasing the overall rate of vaccination. Thus far around the country, we have between a 90 to 95% overall vaccination rate. You're looking at small pockets that still remain unvaccinated, and that's where you're getting the propagation of the disease.
And my last question for you, and I do want to talk about those small pockets because, you know, some people are scared to have these vaccinations done. They are worried, in spite of research, of any potential link. We see polls show that confidence in vaccinations has gone down over the years, certainly over the past 2 decades. Last question for you, Dr. Shaker, what do you think it will take to restore some of the confidence that we saw, you know, around the year 2001 when it comes to vaccinations?
That's such a wonderful question. It's hard to answer, Nicole. I find myself having conversations with patients on an ongoing basis, and everyone seems to have a little bit of a different issue as to why they don't want to, things that they're afraid of. I always tell patients simply, you want to stack up the treatment versus the disease. And that's how you have a conversation. Here's what I stand to benefit, and here are the risks. And that goes with any treatment, any disease, any test. And I think having a one-on-one conversation with a doctor who genuinely knows the information, and kind of in any setting, having an open mind to listening, to learning, going out of your way to educate yourself. I think a little bit more information from this party in terms of the research report that's going to come out. There's nothing wrong with that. It's only going to add further to the idea that vaccinations are helpful.
All right. Dr. David Shaker, certainly appreciate your time. Thank you.
Vaccine hesitancy is rooted in a long history of medical care in the U.S. Some Americans, in fact, have always been wary of mass vaccination efforts dating back to the 1700s with the smallpox shot. From there, you had the 1918 flu outbreak, you had polio in 1955, the swine flu in 1976, and in 2009, you had H1N1. One medical historian at Princeton once put it this way: there is a history of the question of how you balance individual liberty, the right to refuse, versus the policing of the public health. And that is what we're seeing really happening nationwide right now when it comes to the vaccine. Joining me live tonight is Dr. Jay Bott, a primary care physician with the University of Illinois in Chicago. Dr. Bott, appreciate your time. I think that's a good place to start, looking back at the history and what we have learned about vaccines and their efficacy in eradicating and addressing diseases when it comes to public health. What have we learned over these years?
Marnie, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. We've learned that vaccines can save lives. We know that we've eradicated some conditions and diseases that have really cost lives and have made people really sick. Now, with that progress, we've also learned along the way, learned what works, what doesn't work, how we might produce vaccines. And along the way, we've also caused mistrust, whether it's been through institutions, medical institutions, or government. And so we're struggling with that now because with progress, we're fraught with challenges related to mistrust, which causes people to question and fear injecting a biological into them, or not sure if this will really help them. So, even though we're making a lot of progress, there's still some challenges, including historic things like Tuskegee or Henrietta Lacks, and those situations in which we weren't really honest with those that we were engaging with. But that being said, I think it's not just about hesitancy, it's about access, about deliberation, how people are making choices, whether they're ready or not. And it takes a number of conversations sometimes to get them there.
Well, and another layer and component to that fear, and I know you're meeting with patients daily and they have questions for you, is about the speed at which this vaccine came to market. I mean, you look back in history and it took years for some of these vaccines to be developed. With COVID-19, they think it was rushed, it was too fast. I'm worried about the risks. So what do you say to people who are on the fence for those reasons?
Yeah, I hear that daily with my patients. And I think what's the misperception is that it just appeared out of thin air and it was magic and it happened so quickly. But the reality is the work around this vaccine for COVID-19 was based on decades of research around coronaviruses, the common cold, MERS, SARS, H1N1. We know about these viruses and decades of research on mRNA platforms or the ways that vaccines get developed and delivered to save lives.
So you're saying this vaccine went through the proper channels, is safe to take, even though it was a lot less time than the others.
Exactly. So they had a jump start. Think of it that way. They had the research and experience to build on, and then laser focus money and time and resources and people to get us to the FDA approval process, which was the same as any other vaccine or medicine that has gone through our process before. So I feel very confident that they're safe, highly effective vaccines that are in play right now.
The other thing we're seeing right now, Dr. Bott, is these breakthrough infections. People who have received the vaccine, but they are still testing positive for COVID. What should we take away from that in terms of where the virus is right now and what this means as a whole?
Yeah, we have known, and this goes back to your first question about the history of vaccines, that they're not going to be 100% perfect. We know that there's risk of breakthrough infections. What's happening, I think, is that it's being taken out of context. The most important thing to remember is that we know infections can happen, but 95% of people don't get severe disease, hospitalized, or die from that infection. So it's about the amount of viral load that you get in your body. You just get a lot more if you're not vaccinated versus if you are vaccinated.
Similar to what we see with the flu every year, right? Exactly. There's always a chance. Given the rise that we're seeing in cases, I mean, in some areas tripling from what we had been seeing previously, especially with the Delta variant, a lot of misinformation out there about the vaccine, which we're trying to clear up right now. What are you most concerned about as we move into the fall? Of course, the weather gets cold, we head inside, kids are going back to school, and we see this uptick.
Right, we're still having a lot of people with pockets of unvaccination. We have kids under 12 that are not vaccinated. We have going back to school in the fall and being indoors. That's just recipes for a further breeding ground for other variants that we might be in a situation where we need to pivot quickly and we can't handle in the moment. And so I worry about us prolonging a pandemic that we could actually get out in front of and stop ASAP.
Now is our moment.
Yes.
Now is our time. Dr. Bott, we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.